From that information we took from it, we looked into what our guiding principles should be for some alternatives, and mainly speaking to long-term alternatives. So we immediately thought we need to improve intersection operations and clarification. We need to reduce the number of crashes. We need to reduce the vehicle speed. We need to improve safety for the pedestrians and bicycles throughout the intersection, in addition to the motorists. We want to reduce the sign clutter and confusion that comes along with that, and reduce the pavement area. So for long-term modifications, we came up with two alternatives. One is to signalize the intersection, make some geometric changes, and then add signals. And what we're calling alternative 2 is a roundabout, which we'll see shortly some concept sketches of that. In the short term, for an initial improvement that we could make, we looked, and I'll explain this a little more, but beyond going out and doing some of the things right in the immediate circle that we could do as soon as possible, we looked at extending that a little more, and I'll get into this. But in general, what we're going to look at tonight is, for your input, is two different ways to add some bike lanes to Fellsway East. One is called buffered and one's separated, but I'll explain that a little more in a little bit. So if we move on, this again is a long-term solution. This is the signalized intersection. So if I can walk you through it a little bit, and let me get my talking points so I can leave the photo up there. If you just bear with me a second. So, just to explain, here's the little oval circles there now. The darker green is representing the current median and curb lines on either side. That's more existing. So we're looking to, we'll start right in the middle. We would remove, in this option, we would remove the current island. We would extend the median with the light green. We would move the curb line in this location, or in this location, and in this corner a little bit, as you see the light greens. And with that, we would add signals. So this is showing a potential signal arm here for this traffic, and likewise for here and here. And with that, we'd get shorter crosswalks. We'd have ADA compliant wheelchair ramps in the medians and on the edges. You can see we're looking at adding an island and allowing this right turn here in between the island. All of that helps to consolidate the pedestrians and make shorter crossings there. Likewise, we would pull this in here, a little shorter crossing there, tee this intersection up, both to give you a little more distance from the stop, so that if there are traffic backed up, you get a little more chance. If there's only a few cars, to pull into the road and get into the queue to go in this direction. We've got audible, accessible pedestrian signals that we would be using. So the signal heads for the pedestrians would not just be lights, they'd be audible as well. It adds more green space area. It reconfigures, as I mentioned, the intersection geometry. And the main thing you'll notice is that somewhat it reduces the travel lanes. So in the northbound direction, rather than 3 through lanes, we would propose this as parking, and then that's where this would bump out for the pedestrians and to end parking there. Again here, parking would start up and head this direction. So that was the addition of the parking. Because it's signalized, we need to leave some lanes here at the intersection to build up the queues and to allow the queues. So that, what I mean by that is when the light is red, we need an additional lane, or we need 2 lanes in each direction to store those cars and let them get through quicker when the light turns green. With 1 lane and a signal, because you're having to come to a stop, the queuing would be longer, the delay would be a little longer. So in this alternative with a signal, you've got 2 lanes going through. Let me make sure. We've, part of that improvements to the geometry should improve the intersection operation and clarification to determine the driver's right of way. So it's more clear. This is more of a normal intersection. You can go straight through once you have a light. You can go straight through once you have a light. You can make your turns. lefts, rights, as whatever you need to do. It's more of a normalized intersection. And it would give a better overall service, because as we noted before, Highland Avenue is so difficult to pull out that it takes a long time. People are waiting a long time there. So with a signal, it would normalize things. It would allow for that traffic as it pulls up to be detected, and then allow that through, stop the Fellsway East traffic and allow it through. So that more or less covers what we're calling alternative 1, which is to signalize. So if you skip through the next couple, skip that one, and this is the graphic for alternative 2, which is a roundabout design. Somewhat, or quite a bit different than the signal. Rather than the oval that is right here, that exists today, we would modify that into what is known as a modern roundabout. And in so doing, because traffic is continuously moving through in every direction that they need to go and only yielding, more like a true rotary, but it isn't, the geometry of this should act better than a true rotary in a modern roundabout. Since traffic is continuously moving, we can reduce the lanes to 1, entering and exiting. This one here, we did allow for a left turn. We need to do a little more work on that, but with this study and the scope that we had, we did recommend a left turn lane here for this move, while the through would go through that way, rights that way, etc. So a lot of the same changes. For green space, the median extended again in light green. Those are all new green spaces. What this shows here is, because this was just looking at the intersection, it just shows the pavement just being chopped back. Well, that's not something we really do in reality. It's just for this study, it's kind of like the end of the picture. So if you see that, don't be alarmed. We would probably continue that or pan it out in some way that's less sharp than what you're seeing there. But for the purpose of the study, it's just showing that we would narrow it down to 1 lane. What the roundabout does, again, with modifying the intersection geometry, it introduces a desirable vehicle speed by some of these moves. But the sheer fact that you're going through a roundabout, your speed is reduced for this type of maneuver. It reduces the frequency and severity of crashes, and that's based on studies that have been done by the Federal Highway Administration. It increases green space, again. It reduces traffic and vehicle conflicts with reconfigured intersection geometry. Again, as I mentioned, it reduces the travel lanes. It certainly provides some raised crosswalks that, again, are shortened to make the crossing, although it may, because of the roundabout, you know, it adds a little bit of walking. It's just not in the actual street. So, you know, we would propose some sort of path to get you across the pavement, through the traffic, and then go through the median for a while and then cross again. And the reason they're back here is because of these movements going on at the roundabout versus a signal where traffic stopped when you cross it. The roundabout, even though it's a big circle, there's a lot of property that, you know, within the DCR ownership. So this all fits within existing layouts of the roadway, so there shouldn't be any right-of-way takings. It's, you know, if anything, you'd just be working with temporary easements to tie grading back in, you know, to yards in the corners. We would redo the sidewalks through the section and all of that work too, and new curbs, that sort of thing. The modified central oval island is designed for better direct vehicle movements through the intersection. And there's a low cost of project construction versus the signal, and long-term maintenance compared to the alternative 1 with the signal. So signals are expensive both to purchase, and then they're expensive to maintain. There's electric bill, there's, you know, we have to keep them going, make sure that windstorms don't affect them. With the roundabout, that's avoided, and that's why you see a lot of them popping up throughout the country, and certainly here in the Commonwealth. That we could do with the money we had available and the time. So the study itself produced this here, in which that's where you see some of the signage, the yield signs, and what was actually proposed with the study, in addition to the additional signage, including some more speed limit signs that we're working on. The initial study looked at starting an improvement of the geometry, maybe making this more of a circle, bringing the median in a little bit here and a little bit here, and then it looked at testing a one-lane approach in each direction on the Fellsway. Based on the traffic data and it acting as a roundabout, the study proposed putting some traffic cones out and seeing how it would operate with the one lane and similar to a roundabout configuration. So if you go to the next slide, and pass that. So again, here's our intersection that we're talking about. I believe here's Savin Road here, and East Border Street Road over here. So we looked at that, dropping it down to one-lane concept at the intersection that came out of the study. And with that, we said, well, really it's this one stretch of Fellsway East that acts and was built for some reason, we're not really sure why, but it was built more like a highway. And I mean, that shows up on a map like this, where suddenly we go from a two-lane road to a median or highway style, 3 lanes northbound, 2 lanes southbound from there to there. So we thought, rather than just looking at going to one lane at the intersection, we're 1 lane in each direction as we approach this stretch of roadway. Maybe we should take a look at that 1 lane treatment the whole way. Then that way, cars aren't widening out into the multiple lanes, gaining speed, trying to get around each other, and then approaching the intersection. So that's what we started looking at. If you go to the next one. So the short-term concept, I'm calling it, for that stretch of roadway, again, since it's one lane either direction, either end of that, therefore extend the 1 lane concept, utilize the extra pavement that's still out there. At this point, again, short term, we can do it quickly, we don't have to spend a lot of money. If we leave the pavement in place and put down markings, well, what would we do? We thought, oh, well, we could just stripe it all off. But we thought, well, there's a lot of pavement that's out there. Let's look at starting to get the improvement for the bicycle and pedestrian type facilities. So we said, well, if we're going to stripe off and go down to 1 lane in each direction, why not utilize the extra pavement for parking, for a parking lane that you saw in one of the original long-term studies, and then bicycle facilities. The cost of this short-term is low because we're proposing just to go out and use striping or paint to set up these lanes, set up bike lanes. So if you go to the next slide. So we started looking at, well, what bicycle facilities could we do? A standard bike lane on a narrow street would simply have through traffic and a separate, usually 5-foot minimum bike lane. The issue with these are, you've got parked cars opening doors, you've got cars right next to you. The bicycle folks that do use these through bicycle facilities, it is more dangerous. We're fortunate here, we don't have a narrow road. We have a wide road. So we said, well, let's look at these 2 options. One is called a buffered bike lane. And as you see in this photo here, you have traffic traveling towards you in this photo. Then you have a buffered strip. Then you have the 5-foot bike lane. And then you have a parking lane. And in our case, we would add another stripe in this area, a buffer, so the car doors would have room to open. So that's the buffered bike lane option that I'm going to show you in a second. And then the other option would be a separated bike lane. And by that, you can't quite see it, but beyond these cars here are parked cars. So in a separated bike lane, the difference is, rather than parked cars being on the curb, the parked cars move out into their own lane, and then you have a buffer for car doors, and then the bikes are on the curb line. So the benefit to that, of course, is typically for the cyclists. they prefer that because they're fully protected. But there are a little more maintenance issues with it, and it also is a little not intuitive yet. They're starting to become, Boston's putting a few in, but for people to park out in the kind of the middle, what feels like the middle of the road, people just aren't used to that these days. They want to be next to the curb, typically get out, get on the curb. If you've got any mobility issues, it gets you closer. So, but that is the other option. If you go to the next slide. Because of those reasons, though, we would recommend the option to do the buffer bike lane, and that's the one where the cars are parked on the curb. Then there's a bike lane with some buffering on either side. So it's hard to see in this photo, but if you're looking at northbound here, travel lane would be over here, where it is the one lane today. Then we would, the entire length of the roadway, we would put 2 stripes longitudinally with this cross hatching to mark, okay, don't drive here, this is a buffered area. Then next to that would be a marked bike lane, again with the bike symbols, the arrows. Then again there would be another cross-hatched section of striping, and then you'd have the parking lane, similar on this side of the approach. On the southbound, because we have 2 existing lanes, in this direction we have the 1 lane to go through. We have a wider cross-hatched area, and then in this case we don't have enough room for bikes and parking, so we just have a bike lane on the curb line. We have some cross-hatching through here to carry the bikes through the intersection, cross-hatching here, some improved, again, lane striping throughout this intersection here to help. The yield signs are showing up here. We maintain that and add whatever, as we get into the final design, what we needed for markings there. And then come back out of this, we tie that into these side streets again, and then come back out. But in general, you'd have the 1 lane, the cross-hatched buffer, and a bike lane. And again, going back, we would do that the entire length from Savin to East Border. And that's the concept there. Again, for short term, we can do it with striping. If there are any issues, we can adjust accordingly, because it's pretty much just striping on the existing pavement. One of the other benefits that when either one of these alternatives, that when we do go down to 1 lane, it should reduce the speeding. So studies show that, again, if you reduce the lane width, put that cross-hatching in, it becomes a visual cue to drivers. They see that cross-hatching next to them, on either side of them as they're driving down the roadway, that entices slowing down. So that's another benefit, we think, of doing this striping to go through this area. If you go to the next one, in cross-section, that's what that looks like. For southbound, again, there's the bike lane along the curb, the cross-hatched area for buffer, and then this is where the cars would be here. On the northbound side, and this represents the median, on the northbound side, you have the vehicles in this lane, a buffered strip, a bike lane, another buffered strip, and parked cars along the northbound. If you go to the next one. So alternative 2 gets into what was the protected bike lane, which again is the bike lanes are all on the curbs, and where we have a parking lane on the northbound, it would be out here in what currently exists as this middle lane. And then the through lane is similar to the other option, where it's just out along the median curb line. And if you go to the next one for the section, again, southbound is the same because there's no parking, so you still have your bike lane, buffer, through lane. But northbound changes where you have through lane, parking lane, buffer, and bike lane. So those are the alternatives for the short term. We've seen some alternatives for the long term. We wanted to give you some preliminary costs and schedule information before we get to any questions and answers. So again, these are preliminary because, as we mentioned, this study was the first thing we had to do in order to make the next step. The next step would be final design of the short term and final design of the long term. But in general, for construction costs, either of these short-term alternatives, mainly the recommended one because it does do less striping, we're looking in the range of $50,000 to $100,000, which we have identified in this year's budget of our general striping that we could go out in the spring and install that striping. So that, and whatever additional signs we identify as we finish this up. So that's what we'd be looking at there with the spring installation of the striping and any additional signs we want to put up. The long term, the signalization. We're currently estimating in this preliminary point of $650,000 to $1 million. Because as I mentioned, the signals are fairly expensive. There's a lot of curb modification that go along with it. And of course, that's pending funding. We currently don't have that funding in a capital plan at this point. Long-term alternative 2, which is the roundabout. That we're estimating at $350,000 to $500,000. So you can see it's more or less half of the signal. Again, that's still pending funding. Similarly, we haven't identified that funding. That's where we look to our friends at the State House to help, as I know they will. But between these two alternatives, that's what we'd like to hear some feedback. If you go to the next one,